Hello everyone, and welcome to the Verdict is In podcast. Today with me I have Paulo Karat, and today we're going to be discussing mindfulness and a thesis that he wrote while he did his master's about the perceptions of mindfulness in the legal sector. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Paulo Karat, and I'm a senior lecturer here at Nottingham Law School. Before that I was a solicitor back in the day, commercial, corporate work for big firms. And after a personal crisis, I had a nervous breakdown. I was running my own business. I left law school for a bit to run my own business, selling software to law firms, and it was all going well until I had a breakdown. And the relevance of that is that began a process which led to me getting really into mindfulness, and it also led me to do my master's, which then got me to do the thesis, which you've just name-checked.
Indeed. And it was actually a really interesting thesis because, coming from a perspective of I've had experience with mindfulness before, and I wouldn't be able to give a definition of it really, but after reading your thesis, I had kind of a broader idea of what it was and its kind of relevance, just to everyday life and how it can be of use. But how would you define mindfulness?
Right, so mindfulness, people will have different perceptions of it in terms of what they think it is. I always start with a definition that was offered by Jon Kabat-Zinn. So Jon Kabat-Zinn is one of the godfathers of Western secular mindfulness. He wrote a best-selling book called Full Catastrophe Living. He was a clinician at the University of Massachusetts General Hospital. He created one of the heavyweight 8-week mindfulness courses. And he says, and it's reduced to an acronym, right? So a point. So he says mindfulness is the awareness. Really important that you start off by saying mindfulness is like a special kind of awareness about yourself, about how you relate to yourself, but also about how you relate to the world, including people, but also events. Yeah. So it's the awareness, a special type of awareness that arises when you pay attention. Yeah. So it's all about paying attention. Yeah, mindfulness is the opposite of not paying attention. To be mindful by definition means that you're present. Yeah, so it's the awareness that arises when you pay attention on purpose. Yeah, and that's important because there's something very purposeful, very intentional about mindful attention. Yeah, and it's the opposite, if you like, of kind of like an autopilot where you're paying attention to stuff, but it's kind of like you've not necessarily even chosen to pay attention, closely related, I suppose, to just being distracted, mind wandering. So mindfulness is the awareness that arises when you pay attention on purpose in this moment. And that's probably the thing that we all know about mindfulness. It's about being in the moment. And that kind of gets to some of the stuff later about like the misperceptions. Oh, it's all about being in the moment, and people joke about it. Oh, you're in the moment. Well, actually, to a large extent, it is about being in the moment, as opposed to the future and the past. And that's the crucial thing. So it's the awareness that arises when you pay attention on purpose in this moment. The N stands for non-judgmentally. That's an absolutely crucial aspect of mindfulness and mindful awareness, is that you notice what is going on right now just as it is, without labeling it, without judging it to be bad. So, for example, if you feel anxiety, you just notice the sensations of anxiety. You don't say to yourself, oh my God, this is dreadful. Why am I so anxious? The challenge in mindfulness is just to accept there is tension here. Yeah, there is tightness here. And I know that is anxiety. It is here. Not judging it to be bad, not judging it to be good. It's just here. Yeah. And the T is it's a bit of an afterthought. I think they put the T on to make it an acronym that works. So it's to our experience just as it is. So it's the awareness that arises when we pay attention on purpose in this moment, non-judgmentally, to our experience. And that's it. That's my starting definition of mindfulness.
That's a good one.
Do you like it?
Yeah. You went through that very methodically and it emphasised each point. And I feel like it gives a very nice general overview of mindfulness in each stage of what you should be trying to achieve from it.
Yeah, and actually, like many good definitions, you can, whether it be in... Because mindfulness sits within psychology. So my master's is actually from the psychology faculty at Bangor University, because they've got one of the international centres for mindfulness research and practice. But like a lot of good definitions, it starts small, but you can unpack it, and there are layers to it. Yeah. So this stuff about being in the moment, that is absolutely fundamental, because if you unpack that, what we're saying is, because we spend so much of our time as human beings in the future and also in the past, well, we lose connection with the fact that right now, as I'm sat here speaking to you, Rob, everything's good. I'm okay. I may have some things that might worry me about things that may or may not happen in the future, but right now, things are okay, things are good. We spend too much time in our heads, ruminating about things that have happened that we can't change. So why the hell don't you just let them go? If you can't change them, if there's something you can do, why are we still investing time ruminating about the past? Be more present. Think about this present moment. What is your experience now? Well, actually, right now, I'm okay. Likewise in the future. All these things that we worry about, they've not happened. And very often we are literally making things up that might happen just to feed the way the brain works and likes to worry about things all the time. And so mindfulness in that context is so powerful, because this stuff about coming back to the present moment is about trying to break those cycles of automatic thinking, autopilot thinking, worrying about the future, regretting the past. No, just come back to the present, breathe. How are things now? Well, actually, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very wholesome message.
Yeah, very wholesome.
And very much does what it says on the tin, especially in the first few points of, noticing.
Yes.
I can't remember. What was the A?
So the A is like recognizing that mindfulness is a special type of awareness that arises when we pay attention in a particular way.
Yeah.
And you're right to identify noticing. It's like when I teach mindfulness, I often will say, not just at the beginning, but throughout the course, we must remember that the most important thing, actually, is that we are noticing.
Yeah, because you can be mindful of how you feel, but not, notice why maybe that is the way that you're feeling, or
right,
what you can do to move on from it.
And actually, often, so a really good example, and this is pertinent for lawyers. So I teach a lot of lawyers in practice, whether they be trainees or whether they be senior. And when you're really busy at work, and you're working to deadlines, and you're stuck in your head, you're focused so tightly on this future deadline, you stop noticing what your body is actually trying to tell you about your experience and actually about your well-being. So you don't notice, for example, how tired you are. You don't notice how hungry you are. You don't notice how much you need to go to the loo. You don't notice that actually you're really quite anxious. You're kind of holding this stuff off. You may kind of notice that there is anxiety because you sort of know that you're stressed, but you're not sitting with it. You're not really noticing your experience. And so mindfulness is about this discipline of not pushing things away, even things that are nasty, because stress isn't a nice experience, right? And a lot of the way that we deal with stress is that we push it away. We try our best not to notice it. We deny it. We fight it. Mindfulness is about actually doing something a little bit counterintuitive, which is really noticing if I'm stressed. What does that feel like? Better still, noticing so much, so often, with every hour of the day, even every minute of the day, so that I'm noticing the beginning of stress. Because it's much better to notice that you are beginning to get stressed than it is to try and sort your stress out when you're in peak hyper-arousal and shit's going sideways and you don't know what to do. Yeah, so that constant invitation of mindfulness to notice underpins everything about it.
Yeah, and it's important, that goes to one of the points you made, or something that was brought up in the research that you did for your thesis, is that mindfulness requires commitment.
Right. And people hate commitment.
They do.
Like, this is... We really hate committing to stuff that takes time unless we feel... This is my, basic psychological interpretation of human beings, right? We will commit to stuff that we love doing, like, even if it's bad for us, yeah? So I will commit to drinking, on a Friday night. Yeah, I'll invest loads of time, into that, even though it's really harming me, because I really enjoy it, It's like, it's great, having fun. We'll also invest time in stuff that we feel we have to do, that is necessary. One of the issues I think that's come up in my research, specifically this dissertation, in Bangor they call it a thesis, which is weird because it's only a master's level dissertation, so I'm going to start calling it dissertation, is that actually we're asking people to commit to learning a new skill, of mindfulness practice, and also potentially going on a course. So I teach mindfulness courses, structured courses that last weeks. And you're asking people to change their habits and change their life, not change their lifestyle, but introduce something new into a busy lifestyle. And the fact is, it falls between the stuff that you really love to do and the stuff that you have to do. Whenever it's in between, people don't like that. It's like, well, tell me what I have to do and I'll do it. Give me something I love to do and I'll do it. But the other stuff in between, it's really difficult to commit to. And there's a lot of resistance about the amount of time, actually, that we as mindfulness teachers suggest that it takes to develop a really good understanding of the fundamentals of mindfulness, but also habitual practices, habitual behaviors that are associated with mindfulness. One of which, of course, is stuff like meditation. And one of the key, perhaps not surprising findings from my dissertation in the legal sector is that lawyers think it's a waste of time. It's like, literally, are you joking? Do you know how busy I am? You're suggesting that I might stop work, to do what? Sit on my bum for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour? That is just crazy talk. I haven't got time for that. And so there's a very pernicious idea that mindfulness practices are a waste of time. And if that is the perception, which to a certain extent, I think to a very large extent, it is in law. By the way, not just in law. I meet this barrier so often. I teach mindfulness to Joe Public as well. And it doesn't take long for that issue to come out in my teaching. It's like, I haven't had time. You haven't had time? No. So you haven't had time to do this thing, which will, if the evidence suggests, if you keep doing it, will get you better mental health and better well-being. I haven't had time to do it. So actually what you're saying is, you don't value it.
Because actually, if you think about it another way, the cognitive benefits associated with mindfulness and the de-stress associated with mindfulness might even free up more time for you in the future if it makes you a bit more calm, a bit more present.
More productive as well.
Exactly.
So you're absolutely right. And this is why I think it's quite an exciting time to be interested in mindfulness, to teach it, to be researching it, because the evidence that we have, and by evidence, I'm talking about proper clinical and academic evidence, because mindfulness is taught in a clinical context. So it's approved by the National Institute of Clinical Excellence. For example, there is a mindfulness course called MBCT, which is recommended by NICE to prevent depression relapse. Why is it recommended? Because there are randomized controlled trials that show quite clearly that if you do a course of MBCT, you are significantly less likely to relapse into depression. There's a caveat to that, which is that that evidence is only valid for people that have got 3 or more episodes of depression in their history, interestingly. So, but we've also got all the literature in psychology. And then about 17, 18 years ago now, it really started with one neuroscience paper in 2005, Farb et al. And Farb was one of the first neuroscientists that was interested in mindfulness. And he said, look, you psychologists keep speculating and hypothesizing about what's happening in the brain. You're inferring that there must be things happening in the brain for these benefits of mindfulness, greater calm, better cognition, thinking more clearly, making better decisions, better problem solving, more empathy for other people, better working memory, better information processing. You're hypothesizing that there must be some brain changes and brain activity, which explains all of that. Why don't we measure it? Because we've got functional MRI scanners, we've got EEG machines that we can strap people. We can put electrodes on people's heads to measure their brain waves. Why don't we do it? And it was a real light bulb moment. And since then, we've had 15, 16, 17 years of cumulative evidence that says this is what happens. And I can show people that are interested images of the brain, where they change colour because bits of the brain are being activated after mindfulness practice. It's really cool. The brain can change shape. The density of the brain in certain areas can change shape. So it's an exciting time because as a mindfulness teacher, I can be more confident that it's not just my own experience, and the experience, by the way, of thousands of years of the Eastern tradition of mindfulness practice, where they don't see the need to publish research papers. That's what we do in the West, It's like we just do our stuff, we know it works. So I can offer that to people now. And it's just beginning to chip away. It helps me to chip away that perception that it's a waste of time.
Mm. Why do you think that those perceptions exist?
Wow, so part of it, I think, is because of the link to the Eastern tradition. Actually, that came through in my research as well. And one of the, I remember I was doing a set of semi-structured interviews, and one of my participants actually named it as, mindfulness is basically, it's just woo-woo, isn't it? Like Eastern mysticism, we're talking bells, we're talking incense, the lotus position, Now, don't get me wrong, all the stuff that comes from the Eastern tradition I have a huge amount of respect for, because it all goes back to the Buddha. So mindfulness at its historical core is actually deeply spiritual, and it's deeply philosophical. It teaches ethics. Buddhism and mindfulness teaches ethics. But in the West, and I'm not a Buddhist, right? So I've been trained to teach in a secular fashion. But people have these ideas that mindfulness is this Eastern mysticism, And they literally, people can't see it on the podcast, but I'm doing that weird thing with my shoulders and my fingers where I'm kind of like, ooh.
It is adding to the explanation.
So that's, I think, a big part of it. And it kind of feeds into this idea that it's kind of just pointless. It's like, it's woo-woo, it's mystic, it's supernatural. There's a theme there about the spiritual, supernatural aspects of it, and it culminates with this idea that it's just a complete waste of time. And if you think about the implications of mysticism, there's an implication that it's not evidence-based. It relies on faith. Well, not in my experience. My experience is there's plenty of evidence that it works. But actually, I have my own evidence, which links back to my recovery from, the breakdown that I referred to. I don't actually need these research papers to help me understand that it works. I think better. I relate to people better. I still lose my shit, but I lose it less frequently. I still get stressed, but I don't get as stressed. I notice my stress building a lot earlier because I got a better connection with my body. I understand that, and I call it sicky tired. So for me, part of my stress signature is when I start feeling sicky tired, by which I mean I've learned that there's a special quality of tiredness when I've been pushing myself too hard, where it feels like my chest is tightening, and at the same time I feel sick in my stomach. And that I've learned to recognize is basically my timeout signature. It's like, that is my body saying, mate, enough with trying to be productive. You need to go to bed, man. Because you are hanging. And if you push yourself beyond this point, you are going to be really unproductive. You're going to be making bad decisions. The quality of your output is going to suck Like literally, like the stuff you're writing right now, it's not making sense. You might kid yourself that it's quality, but it's not. Time out. And that has helped me massively. Actually, to do more, ironically, because I'm more energized more often. Because I crash, I burn out less often. Because I'm in constant relationship through my mindfulness practice with what's going on in my system. So, yeah, there we go.
It's an interesting account. I think it's like when you're so stressed, especially when you've got a lot to do, the natural way of thinking is I need to get this done, and then I'll be less stressed because I've gotten it out of the way.
Right.
But really, especially if it's like a lot of things that you have to do or a very big thing, just keep hammering and hammering and hammering at it will just make it harder and make it take longer.
But don't get me wrong. I mean, there are some days when I am very, very clear about what I need to do. I'm very clear about how to do it. And I'm very clear about the fact that I don't have much time. Yeah? And I can punch it hard during the day without stopping like every hour for a 15-minute practice, right? That's not how I roll. But what I'll try to do first thing in the morning is introduce some mindfulness ritual into the start of my day. Yeah. So, but the important thing as well is it doesn't have to be like a meditation. This is part of the misconception as well. So mindfulness can be what I call informal or formal. Yeah, so mindfulness teaching, formal meditation is when you decide to do a meditation. Mindfulness, formal practice rather, is when, for example, you decide to do a meditation. Right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to find a room, yeah, get a mat maybe, or a chair, or a pillow, or a cushion, I'm going to sit. I'm going to meditate for half an hour. I will often do that. I do that probably 3 or 4 times a week. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be that I drink my coffee, my first coffee of the morning. It could be that I just sit and I pay attention on purpose in this moment without judgment to my experience of how that coffee tastes. It's a really hard practice because I drink coffee like, I just neck it if I'm not careful. And that's my autopilot, getting me ready for being productive. Sometimes I challenge myself and I say, look, I'm not going to have time for a practice today, realistically. I haven't got half an hour. I need to punch through, but I might do a coffee practice when I'm brushing my teeth. Yeah? I know that my electric toothbrush is set for 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes of mindfulness practice right there. Paying attention on purpose in the moment as best I can to each of those electric toothbrush brush strokes. How does it feel on my teeth? Really paying attention. That's an opportunity to disconnect from my thoughts about the future and my thoughts about the past. And I'll keep in contact during the day with how I'm doing. And if I judge that I'm in what we call homeostasis, right? So if I judge myself to be in homeostasis, so my physiology and psychology, are in balance, I may not do a mindfulness practice at all that day because I'm balanced. But it's very rare that I'll go 3 days in balance, maintaining balance, working as hard as I do, without practicing. And that's one of the connections that I notice. I notice that when I practice, I stay in balance for longer. And when I come out of balance, if I practice, I get back into balance quicker. So that's something that I've learned.
Yeah. So mindfulness is kind of a way of understanding the building blocks of you.
Yeah.
And how you function and what's the best way to keep you functioning at an effective level without damaging yourself.
Yes.
And so do you think maybe for those people for whom mindfulness doesn't work is because they're in some sort of neglect about having to do that? Do you think there's a sort of you have to believe in it for it to work?
Right. Yeah, there is something in that. And I will draw now not from my master's dissertation, but from my experience of teaching lawyers. Yeah, so I teach a lot of lawyers. Typically, I position it as like well-being, resilience, or performance training. I won't necessarily sell it as mindfulness training because of these perceptions that I discovered in my dissertation. But I use mindfulness as my underpinning. What I've discovered is it's a massive leap of faith to start mindfulness training with lawyers at the experiential level, by which I mean loading it with loads of mindfulness practice without first doing a whole bunch of theory. Because lawyers love theory. Like, we really love theory, yeah?
Yeah.
And trainee solicitors love theory. Partners in law firms. I work with partners in law firms. If you say to them, we're going to start by doing meditation, you can see them flinch. It's like, you can see them looking at you and squinting, like raising their eyebrow and like, really? But if you say, what I'd like to do is to start with some psychology theory, literally they go, oh, okay. And they'll sit and listen to that. They'll give you like 20 minutes of their time listening to psychology theory. And then if you say, well, I've got another module on neuroscience, have you? And they'll give you another half hour to listen to the neuroscience, yeah? They are lapping up the evidence. I mean, they'll challenge you, as all good lawyers will. So you've got to be on your game. You've got to know your evidence. You've got to know your papers. You've got to know your mechanisms that you're talking about. But you get them to a point where their belief comes from, slightly ironically, a very cognitive, in your head way of processing, which is not about mindfulness. Mindfulness is about listening to your body and hearing your mind, but not overthinking. The way to get to lawyers is to hit them hard with a theory. Get them to buy into the psychology, the neuroscience, the clinical trials. And then if you get them interested in that, then what you do is you have short mindfulness practice. Really short stuff like a 3-minute meditation, a 1-minute meditation, an 8-minute meditation. And you scale it up, as you're teaching them. What you don't do, in my experience, is say, right, should we do a 45-minute body scan? They look at you like you're completely mad. So, that I agree with you, actually. I think there is a sense in which they have to believe first to do it. You get the belief in a different way. You get it theoretically. And then you get them to practice. And then you start to really get that double whammy. They've got their intellectual belief, and it's now beginning, if it's going well, to be backed up by their experiential belief. Because, and the exit feedback from the training that I do for lawyers, it's really gratifying because they say, look, I was really skeptical. I wasn't sure why I was doing your program. I was told by the firm I had to, But actually, I've realized I do feel something different when I meditate. So I am going to try and meditate some more because of the way that it helps me hold my stuff together. I am more productive. I thought it would come at a cost to my productivity. I've realized I was wrong. That is a 10-minute investment of time. Still doesn't make it easy to find that 10 minutes, that 15 minutes in the day, but at least you've got them to a point where they get why they might. And then it becomes a bit like going to the gym. It's like we all know, or exercise generally, we all know that exercise is good for us, right? But when we're really busy, what's the first thing often that falls off the... It's the exercise, it's the well-being stuff. It always happens. The challenge for me is getting lawyers to put mindfulness genuinely within the core of what they believe is good for them. And this is work that I'll be doing for the next, 20, 30 years. I'm not going to fix it. I'm unlikely to fix it on my own, because only me. But I'm unlikely to fix the stuff that I'm doing with the lawyers that I'm working at. This is going to take like a generation, to sort of really get this stuff embedded.
Yeah, I think especially coming from an aspect of there opposition. It's not like it's a new thing that no one knows about. It's a thing that's existed, and people, especially in the West, have had like very cognitive opposition to. Yes,
and it's about prejudice. If we unpack a literal meaning of prejudice, people prejudge what mindfulness is about. They have a preconception based upon all sorts of tropes, and cliches, which actually very often aren't based in fact. And I mean, it occurs to me actually that one thing we haven't done is a mindfulness practice. And I don't want to take up too much space in the podcast, but to give you an example of like a myth busting. So if you've got people with these misconceptions, with these prejudices, oh yeah, meditation, why would I meditate for like 20 minutes? Like literally do nothing. Well, one of the best practices that I've found, it's drawn from a course called MBSR, and it's 1 minute long. That's it. And if you don't mind, I mean, it's a rhetorical question, Rob, because I'm going to do it whatever you say. So why don't we do the stop practice? So it's a 1 minute practice. So inviting us to find a comfortable sitting position. Yeah, if you're listening to this at home, just a comfortable sitting position, just noticing the contact between your feet and the ground, perhaps your bum on the chair, where your hands are, perhaps noticing your shoulders. And the stop practice starts with an invitation to stop. Stop what you're doing. Take a breath. Take another. And as we breathe, observing what's here. Body sensations, thoughts, feelings, heart, body and mind. Just noticing what's here for you. And try not to judge it, try not to change it. Seeing if you can just allow it to be just as it is. As we continue to breathe. Before choosing to proceed with whatever you're doing. So I was taught that practice at the University of Bangor by one of the best, most well-respected teachers of mindfulness in the UK, a chap called Karuna Veera, who, as the name suggests, is a Buddhist, and he is absolutely fantastic. And he taught me to teach MBSR, which is one of the other clinical courses. It's actually deployed. It's if you have acute and chronic pain and the meds don't work, NICE recommends MBSR as a referral from the pain clinic, because actually if the meds don't work, you've kind of exhausted your physical options in terms of like blocking pain receptors. It's just not working at the physiological level. And so it's work that you can do to actually change your relationship, your psychological relationship to the pain. And again, it's proven to be effective. But KV taught that practice, and he said, look, it's a fantastic practice. It takes 1 minute, and you can do it multiple times in a day. I will try and do something like the stop practice at intervals during my day. Yeah, some kind of breathing practice, but often the stop. And he does it, for example, preemptively every time he makes a cup of tea, apparently. So he goes to the kettle, flicks the switch. That has become like a psychological anchor. Oh, I flicked the switch. Oh, stop practice. So he stops and does a stop. But he also does it responsively, where he can feel his stress signature building in the body. And he just uses the stop to see if he can preempt it. So mindfulness on a practical level doesn't have to be, oh shit, I've got to clear the diary for half an hour while I do this meditation. It can be something like the stop practice.
Yeah, and I think changing, it's what you discussed in your dissertation, changing those perceptions where it's, something you have to invest a lot of time into.
Yeah.
And something that, because people, when you think of the word meditation, you kind of just think sitting in silence, kind of trying to clear your mind. But it's with mindfulness involved, it's a lot more than just sitting in silence.
It absolutely is. And actually, for people that struggle to sit in silence, there are guided meditations. Yeah. And what you'll notice, certainly from guided meditations that are from, I would say, a robust mindfulness school, if you hear the phrase, right, so you know if you're listening to a shit meditation, if at any point the guidance says, now asking you to clear your mind, like, who the hell can do that? And actually, it's the opposite. It's the opposite of what we're inviting in mindfulness meditation. We are inviting a noticing of what's in the mind. Not a clearing of the mind, and noticing. So it's noticing those thoughts, but with the invitation, the challenge to notice them, acknowledge what they are and where they were taking you, but then see if you can bring your attention back, typically to your breath as a key anchor in the body. Yeah? That is the key practice of mindfulness practice. We are building that muscle of attention. It's a way that it's sometimes called. Yeah, so we're not trying to clear the mind, we're noticing the mind. And when we notice it, we come back to the breath. Yeah? So if we notice what's happening there, theoretically, we're going from a cognitive state, yeah, lots of busy thoughts, often in the future, often in the past. Stuff that's happened, you can't change it. Stuff in the future, it's not happened. Yeah, what are you worrying about? It's literally not happened. Yeah, but we get caught. We notice that pattern. We notice it. That word again. We notice it. We acknowledge it. We respect it. We come back to the breath, to the body, to the feet, whatever anchor works for you. And we breathe. And we're in the moment. We're back in the present. We can't harm ourselves so much in the present. The harm that we do, yeah, is in the future and in the past. Yeah, when we just tie ourselves up in psychological torture and knots and about stuff that we've done in the past, stuff that we're worried about in the future.
Yeah. It's I've obviously had my experiences with mindfulness before, but it's I've never had such an in-depth conversation. It's not something that I've looked into. I have tried, especially last year, to try and work meditation into my schedule. But whenever I did, it was always clear my mind and try and just not focus on anything.
Right.
And then something pops into your mind, something you forgot about, and you're like, oh, now that I've remembered, I really need to do this thing. And then
that's it.
Yeah.
Meditation finished, because you need to crack on. And interestingly, so two things about that. One is, if you go into meditation thinking that the purpose is to clear your mind, you'll think you're a failure. That will become a barrier to doing it. It's just like, well, I can't do this. If you reframe it as actually mindfulness practice is an invitation to notice what's going on, then you can't fail. When you notice that your mind is, careering around, you've woken up. In that moment, you're back in the present, and you can do something about it. Now, but the second point is your point about you remember something. Yeah? Oh, shit. What I've actually started to do with my law clients, my lawyer clients in practice, early in the programs that I teach, is I say, when you start meditating, why don't you take a notebook with you and a pen? This is unorthodox, but I've learned that this is how I want to teach mindfulness for lawyers. Take a notebook and a pen. Whenever something pops into your mind that you fear you'll forget if you carry on meditating, write it down. And then see if you can come back to the practice. If you have another thought that you think you need to write down, well, write that down. And that can take some of the pressure off and can keep you what we call on the mat. Yeah? Because what you're describing is very common. Stuff pulls you off the mat because you need to get doing. This way, it's a compromise, but it hopefully keeps you on the mat. And then you can attend to your to-do list later. Yeah? It also, a third point, so I said there were two, there's a third from what you're saying. It doesn't have to be meditation. Like when I first was signposted to mindfulness, I was still pretty depressed, actually. And it was a disaster to meditate, because all that happened was this guy that's got a tendency to ruminate about really negative thoughts, catastrophic thoughts, just had more space and time, for those thoughts to eat him up. And I said to my therapist, who actually she teaches now at psychology at NTU, Rachel Phillips, wonderful woman. She said, okay, so meditation is not working. It's too soon for meditation. Have you tried Tai Chi? I was like, no. And Tai Chi was my gateway to mindfulness. So mindful movement. I don't do Tai Chi because I've invested more time in Qigong, which is like a derivative. Well, it's part of the family of Tai Chi. So typically standing movement practices. I love Qigong. I also love yoga, like I do Hatha yoga. And I love Hatha yoga. I love Qigong.
What kind of yoga is Hatha yoga?
So Hatha yoga, so there's There's all sorts of like really energetic yoga, isn't there? There's all sorts of yoga where you get yourself into some really complicated positions where you're likely to fall and probably hurt yourself. My body is not ready for that stuff. Hatha yoga is more stretching, yeah? So the most vigorous kind of stretching I do in Hatha yoga is like the bridge is a Hatha yoga technique, but I do the half bridge because I'm too old and knackered to do the full bridge. So it's sort of stuff like that, stretching. I love it. It's really good. And I do that as much, if not more, than I do like a half-hour meditation. Mindful walking. So I'm a big walker. I've got lots of dogs. I've noticed that most people walk mindlessly. They'll kid themselves that it's mindfulness. It's not. You're getting exercise, you're getting fresh air. That's good for you, right? On its own terms. But most people don't walk mindfully.
What is walking mindfully?
So Jon Kabat-Zinn again, yeah, and he's got a gift for deadpan. And he was once quoted as saying, mindful walking is very much like walking, except you notice that you're walking. So, but actually, like all quotes of, there's a level of genius in that, because effectively what he's saying is, if you go back to the definition of mindfulness that he gave you, a point, yeah, you try to integrate that definition into your walking. So you walk and you're paying attention on purpose in this moment, without judgment, yeah, to your experience. And the experience happens to be walking, the body in movement, the sensations of the feet as you hit the path, yeah, the sensations of the arms as they swing, the feeling of the breeze, if there is one, yeah, hitting your face, noticing degrees of temperature, cold, warm, yeah, noticing leaves, sky. And it's all happening in this moment, yeah? You're noticing your breathing as part of that. That is mindful walking, but it's the opposite of what most people do. And I know this because I asked them, you know, it's like, so when you walk, yeah, where are you? Are you in the present, the future, or the past? And sometimes they look at me like, you are. But when they pause and reflect on the question, absorb it, yeah, actually when I walk, I'm usually at work already. I'm drafting my emails. I know that I didn't respond to that email from yesterday. Yeah, so I need to speak to him. I need to email her. This is my to-do list, yeah? Right, top things I need to do today. All of this stuff is happening in the future. You have projected yourself forward in the future. When you do that, you do not notice your feet on the ground. You do not notice your breathing. You do not notice that your dogs, in my case, are playing and running around. And actually, when I pause to look at my dogs, it fills me with joy because they're really good fun, my dogs. But so often I'll walk for 45 minutes and there's a conscious realization at the end of it. I don't actually remember. I don't even remember that my dogs were on the walk because I was too busy at work. Or something happened yesterday at work, yeah, or I had a row with a friend or my partner and I'm still unpacking that, you know. That is not mindful walking. That's mindless walking.
Mm. It's very difficult, especially if you have a very busy life, to let all of that go, because it's like all of that stuff, if something's really gotten on your nerves and really kind of agitated you, there's no escaping it sometimes. That's what it feels like. It's
sticky thoughts, yeah. We sometimes talk about the stickiness of thoughts, yeah. And we find unpleasant thoughts often and unpleasant situations and mistakes. Like, we love a good inquest, don't we, on things that we've, you know, cocked up. Yeah, we love a good inquest. We will go at it 15, 20, 30, 100 different times. Oh, why did I do that? Why didn't I come at it from this perspective? You know, why did I say that? Oh my God, what an idiot. What was I thinking? The trouble is, don't get me wrong, sometimes it's appropriate for us to revisit the past. Because there might be some learning. Because it might be that you were just a dick. And maybe if you learnt from it, you could be less of a dick in the future. Yeah. But often what we do is we go beyond the reflective learning cycle, and we just go through this like loop of thinking. Oh my God, I was bad, I was shit, I wish I hadn't done it. And it just like, and we find it so seductive. And it's almost like, if we think about it for long enough, if we repeat our thought process long enough, somehow there'll be this moment of catharsis. In my experience, there isn't a moment of catharsis. The moment of catharsis, which is very much linked to mindfulness theory and practice, is the moment of catharsis is when you can say, do you know what, mate? Let it go.
Yeah.
And you don't just say it, but you believe it and you act it. I'm going to let that go because you know what? It's done.
I think there's nothing more cathartic than letting something go. When something, especially an event in the past, no longer has the power to emotionally agitate you like it did,
right?
Maybe just after it happened, or
yes,
it's very freeing. It's like I'm in control again of how I feel.
Absolutely bang on the money. So, and that's been explained in psychological theory. Yeah, that what human beings perceive, and it's sometimes called the ABC model, right? So we perceive that event happens, which is ascribed to the letter A, and then we have our emotions, which is ascribed to the letter C. So events cause emotions. Well, where are we in that? We have no agency. What psychological theory says is what we miss is the fact that there's a point B, which is our interpretation of that event. It's our interpretation of that event which causes the emotion. We are the creators of our own suffering. And this goes back to Buddhist theory. The Buddhists taught a lot about suffering. Yeah? And if we acknowledge, if we understand that our interpretation of events is what causes the misery, we have some agency all of a sudden, because I'm hearing you describe agency, autonomy. Yeah? Do I have to be burdened by the emotions, the unpleasant emotions that were created way back in the past? It's not always easy, but if we at least acknowledge that it is our interpretation that is causing the suffering, not the event itself per se, then suddenly we've got some room, we've got a platform, yeah, where we've got agency, we've got some control. We can influence that. We can, if not nullify the pain, yeah, we might just be able to dial it down. Yeah, we might think about it 5 times a day rather than 50 times a day. Yeah?
Yeah.
We might beat ourselves up, with a twig rather than a big stick baseball bat. Yeah?
Yeah. And it's definitely important to be able to appreciate that about your own kind of state of being. This kind of conversation, it makes me think if there's a link, you've probably heard of Stoicism.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's kind of, from my perspective, a link between Stoicism and mindfulness, because Stoicism is all about don't worry about things that are outside of your control. Yeah.
Well, one of my summer readings when I went to Spain was I was determined to read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, right? So Marcus Aurelius, as most people know, was one of the greatest, apparently, Roman emperors. He was also hugely significant in the Stoic tradition, yeah? And I read it with a particular agenda, which actually was, can I find the links between Stoicism and mindfulness? And I find a few, and you've absolutely nailed one of them, which is like, there is no point suffering over something that we have no control, yeah, put broadly. And that is a key part of the mindfulness curriculum, this acceptance, this letting go of the stuff that's painful to us, where we have no control over it. But actually, and I mean, this may be we might be going too far into it. I came to the impression that, Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism, there's some overlap, but there is also an awful lot of judgment in Stoicism. Because ethics is ultimately about right and wrong, one way or the other, right? I mean, this from jurisprudence last year. And there's an awful lot of right and wrong in Stoicism. It was hugely influential for the development of Christianity, for example, yeah? So it gets very judgy,
In what way? I'm interested to.
Well, in terms of it very quickly becomes ethics and ethics of behaviours. Do this, don't do that. Yeah?
Yeah, I see what you mean. The thing is with meditations, you got to remember, is he wasn't writing that with the thought that anyone else would read it. Those were his personal.
They were private.
Yeah.
It was exactly right.
It was kind of like a rule book to himself, really.
That's right, and I think I'm right in saying that meditations, you see, it is a bit of a misnomer, because he certainly didn't mean to imply that he was somehow co-opting the Buddha into his. He wasn't talking about meditations. It's more reflections, but also in the original, it wasn't called meditations.
Yeah.
It was called something like private notes. You know, so you're right. It wasn't ever meant to be read, but it was read, and it became, it became influential, very influential in the development not just of early Christianity, but Christianity through the ages. And so, for example, if you look at like one of the most well-known translations of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations was one that was done, in the early 20th century, from a guy who was effectively a Victorian. He actually wrote it. It overlapped the Edwardian era, but he was quite old when he wrote it. So, but it's a lot of judginess. Yeah, and mindfulness is the opposite of judginess. Yeah, remember that N in the up point. It's non-judgmental awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is the route to compassion and self-compassion. Because if we always judge our actions, for example, to have been bad actions, then we are creating a perpetual platform for self-criticism. Now, don't get me wrong. If we behave badly, there is an ought in there. We ought to own it and apologize, put it right, learn from it, but then let it go.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of revisiting it? Once you've done your reparations, once you've said you're sorry, once you've learnt the learnings, let it go. Don't judge yourself as being a bad person because you did it. Yeah, just let it go. Yeah, so there are links, but...
Yeah. I would recommend On Shortness of Life by Seneca. Seneca's different to Marcus Aurelius. I haven't read Meditations yet. I've seen, obviously, some quotations from meditation. Let's finish off with talking about kind of like legal sector specifically, which you have kind of touched upon a few times, but it's been more kind of like fleeting and in passing rather than kind of as a whole. So why do you think it's so difficult for lawyers to accept mindfulness?
Yeah, it kind of is all that stuff that we said. One thing that we didn't say, which I think is at the heart of it, is that lawyers identify as strong. My research suggests that mindfulness is associated with weakness. Yeah, so in other words, you have mindfulness training if you have a deficit of psychological resilience. And that's a big problem in the legal sector, because, in other words, if you sign up to a mindfulness course, so my research suggests, you're kind of saying to the firm, I need some help with my psychological resilience, which is another way of saying I am weak. I can't do this job that requires me to work 12-hour days on tight deadlines, with little sleep, with high levels of anxiety and stress. Yeah? What lawyers want to do is stuff that correlates with strength, which is why even busy lawyers will sometimes make it a virtue to go to the gym. Yeah, they get the Lycra on. Yeah, or go for a bike ride. Yeah, that's strong. That's about building physical strength and stamina that helps you do the job. There's nothing wrong with that. That's strength. Mindfulness is weak. Mindfulness is weakness. Yeah. So the challenge is to try to re-educate on that, try to reframe that. And it is common, albeit not very original, for mindfulness teachers to say that mindfulness is like training for the brain. Yeah, it's psychological training. Yeah, it's your marathon training for the psychological marathon that life is, because it really is. Like, we're looking, graduates now, like 30, 40 years ago, it was common to retire at 55. That is really not common anymore. So we've got graduates who are kind of graduating, 21, 22, 23, say, And realistically, they're going to be working to late 60s, early 70s. That's a big shift. That is a big shift. So we need to prepare psychologically for that shift if we're going to be happy, fulfilled, productive, and sane. Frankly, sane.
I was actually really surprised to read that in the dissertation, though, because I would have thought that that's quite an outdated point of view to think. When you think about it logically or analytically, as lawyers are supposed to, or are supposedly renowned for doing, building your mental strength up so that you can achieve more and be in control of yourself, how that isn't connotated with strength is kind of baffles me.
It baffles you, but I would suggest that it might be because A, you're more progressive in your thinking as an individual, B, because you represent Generation Z.
Yeah.
Are you Generation Z?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the seniors, my generation, are old-fashioned. We're old-fashioned. And a lot of this comes from really old-fashioned attitudes around what weakness is and what strength is. There is still some taboo. There's a lot of taboo about even admitting sometimes. Like the whole piece about normalizing mental illness in the workplace, we are still at the foothills of that journey. It's beginning to happen, like normalizing the fact that this thing that I'm experiencing is a form of mental illness. Yeah, it may not be clinical, but actually often it is, by the way. There's International Bar Association research which quotes just how frequent it is for lawyers to be diagnosed with clinical depression and clinical anxiety. It's really common. But even if it's not, it's there. It's a form of mental illness. But lawyers don't want to admit it, at least not my generation, the 40-somethings, the 50-somethings.
Yeah, I guess from my more progressive point of view, it's if you don't show any weakness in the sense that you've spoken about at work or anything like that, if you show that strong personality, but then you go home and maybe you're abusive to your friends or other people that you know, and you're angry and you're shouting, that's a weakness in itself.
Correct. And I could give you an example of a good friend of mine whose husband is a very senior partner at one of the 10 biggest law firms in the world. I know that he does that job, very competently. But when he goes home at night, he drinks a lot, and he often finds himself in bed with his wife, my friend from law school days, in the fetal position, crying like a baby. And she has to hold him, often for an hour, for him to calm down.
Yeah.
And then the cycle begins again the next day. He wakes up, right, armor on. Oof, in I go. I have my doubts about how sustainable that is for him. At some point, I think he is going to crash. It's not my place to have that conversation with him because he's not my friend. He's my friend's husband. But there are so many examples of that. And it's really sad. There are a lot of miserable lawyers who are miserable because they're investing in the idea of strength, when actually more of a recognition of their vulnerability, somewhat ironically, becomes the pathway to greater resilience.
Do you think that it's actually, especially in a top 10 law firm, it's such a Machiavellian environment that it's almost impossible to be vulnerable because vulnerability is equated with loss? Someone will take advantage.
And there's a lot of that. The literature on mindfulness and law is very much in its infancy in the UK. There's a lot of literature in the US mindfulness in law movement. And there is a lot of anecdotal evidence and published evidence about perceptions that I can't show weakness because it's a zero-sum game. I am litigating to beat you. My client and your client are in opposition. They are enemies. I need to beat you. And if I show vulnerability, you will exploit it because that's the game. And we've got a lot of work to do on that. There's a guy called Scott Rogers in the States who's doing some work about, look, guys, we've got this all wrong. Yeah? Showing a bit of humanity, if we call it that, rather than vulnerability. Yeah? It shouldn't come with the risk that you are exploited. It should be part of an ethical conversation about, look, we're both trying to get to the point where we service our clients' best interests. Yeah, why can't we just drop the bullshit, drop the bravado, drop the strength, drop the armor, and just talk like human beings? And maybe that way I don't have to go home and have a nervous breakdown every week.
Yeah, I guess when it's an adversarial situation, that also applies. But I was even thinking within the firm itself.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
When you're going to war with, well, I guess going to war, that's what like litigation is compared with.
Yeah.
But when you don't even feel like you have a team that you can go to war with, it's like you're all by yourself in this kind of like Wild West.
That is very perceptive, and the work that I do with senior lawyers backs that perception up. There's a lot of sense of isolation, a lot of feelings of loneliness, a lot of feelings of like partnership meetings where everybody is presenting a really strong face. Oh yeah, my figures are really good this month. Yeah, I've got so many deals coming in. And you're there thinking, oh, fuck. I can't compete with that guy. Oh my God, my figures are shit. Oh my God. And it's horrible. It creates a toxic environment, actually. And what some of my senior clients are saying is, I wish that I had the courage in that partnership meeting to say, do you know what, guys, I'll be honest with you. I'm not happy with my figures this month, but I don't know what to do about it because I'm working really hard and that's all I've got in the pot. I'll be honest with you, I'm feeling a bit exposed right now. Any help? Got any ideas? But because you're a partner, you're a head of group potentially, you're a head of team, your job is to be fixing problems, not coming to the partnership with problems. So we've got a lot to unpack there. And it does create this feeling of loneliness. It really does. I know that from conversations with seniors.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame because I thought I might have been gaslighting myself into thinking it was a worse problem than it was, but,
No, there's stuff there we need to work on.
That's interesting. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about mindfulness in the legal sector?
No, I don't think so, other than depending on when this podcast goes out, a heads up that at some point in term 1, I'll be running a mindfulness course. I'll be publicising it, pretty hard within the various channels within the faculty. Any help in terms of publicising it, once I've got the details, it will probably start 3rd week of October, something like that, for 6 weeks. It's a course called Finding Peace in the Frantic World. And it's an Oxford University course. I've been trained to teach it, and I really want some of our law students, whether they be undergrads or grads, to sign up to it, because it will be the beginning. It can be the beginning of your journey into like functional mindfulness, a real skill and an understanding of mindfulness.
Is it free to sign up?
Yes.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for coming on board and sharing your insights. It's been a really interesting conversation.
I've loved it, Rob. Thank you for inviting me. It's been great. Thank you.
No worries.
See you soon.